Welcome to week three of Lit 4121, Mythology of Heroes and Villains. So we're now into the rhythm of things. We all know how this works. I want to mention one thing. I noticed that a lot of people are having trouble with the partner project. The first one, several people were having trouble getting their partners selected or able to get communication with the partners in time. And in a couple cases, a few people recorded their conversations pretty directly and then basically gave me their overall summary at the end of it. What I'm mostly after is your thoughts about it. So rather than just doing a straight up record of what everybody said, I'd rather each of you kind of gives me a summary of what you said and what the other person said to help you think about the interpretation you're making and how you understand what the other person is saying. Because part of this point of this is when we talk about stories and when we tell stories to each other, we interpret those stories in various ways, often based on our biases and the biases of the people who have told us about them. So, what I want to make certain you're doing is not just saying so and so said this, but I want you to say that when I asked this question, the response was this, and I think that means. That's kind of what I'm after from this. And also, if you're having trouble getting communication with your partner, don't forget that you can go to class participants and have a list of everybody in there and try to send email to them. And there are other ways to contact them as well. If you didn't have a partner last time and you're not certain you're going to have a chance to try to find one, I would urge you to try to email some of the people you tried to contact the first time. And if you still can't get in touch with each other, please try to bounce your ideas off of somebody else and then give me an idea who those people are and what the discussion was like. A few of you did this with family, and that's fine. Just give me a little bit more of a context for who you were talking to and what they said and what they knew. So in this course, this week we're talking about tricksters. And tricksters are an interesting thing. So first of all, the reading is not directly about tricksters. It's about being an outsider. And I've mentioned this before, and how the hero has to transcend or stand outside of or be somewhat separate from the society that they protect. Now, this is an important concept because even the heroes that represent our culture, for example, if you choose the heroes Captain America, or you choose a detective or a firefighter or a soldier or whatever, they're in several ways, especially when we give their stories a mythic, heroic quality. They are of but not the same as our society. So, Captain America, for example, is an exemplar of what we wish we could be, but he is also somewhat separated by given his power and his training, and specifically in the story, if you've watched the movie or read the comics or whatever, he is a person out of time. He's literally a different times idealized version of what we thought the American dream was. And this is true of a story about a soldier as well. Is that soldier may be just one of different many soldiers, but their experiences, what they've been through, their training, their abilities after they've been trained, by necessity, separate them from the society that they're in some way. They don't have to be completely isolated, but they are slightly different than the people around them, usually when the story takes place. Even if the story is a military story where everybody is in the same society, the stories we focus on are the people who stand out somewhat. I'm thinking of the HBO series based on the book Band of Brothers, where quite often they would focus on people who stood out from Easy Company in some important way because they were slightly different than other members of Easy Company. So that is what this otherness means: is it's somebody out there who uh, has to make a choice, who has to be make a decision to do something for society that they do not necessarily fit into it. And that's why in this, of course, they will make references to Buffy Summers, who's specifically protecting high school, even though she is not well accepted by her high school, and so on and so forth. Many of the examples used are like that. And part of the reason that they have to be separated is they have whatever special thing that makes them a mythic character. That mythology means that they are able to do something that most people can't do. Even so, if you tell, this is where the difference between a story of like a detective or a regular cop or anybody like that stands out from a story that we would follow of a of a heroic detective or a heroic cop, because in some way they are different. The theory might be that these people always have that ability within them, but it's not until they're called upon to show that ability or step up or do something different than the people around them that we tell the story. So these are important concepts to follow. Tricksters, however, are a concept that are really worth studying, and I want to doubly make certain that we are paying close attention to this crash course video. And I would, if I were you, read through a little bit of the Wikipedia page in more detail. Look at fictional tricksters. You've probably heard of at least one of them. Um, Not only talk about how they feature in other cultural literatures, but also go down to the references and see if you can recognize any of them from these references. I am a big fan of trickster characters because they complicate those ethical questions you did from when you were talking about partners in the partner project number one, and also when you talk about your analysis. Tricksters are very rarely ethical beings, but they can often inform ethics or represent ethics or explain ethical concepts by their failures to be ethical. But that doesn't mean they can't be heroic. Sometimes they do things that are villainous, sometimes they do things that are heroic, but what they always do is cast our cultural assumptions into a new light. So if you have a story about Anansi here, or if you talk about other tricksters such as Hermes and Loki, you'll notice that there's another video I would highly recommend you watch, even though it's not required for this course. Uh, because what they do is they are important to their groups, but they also are allowed to comment on and make fun of whatever society or whatever groups of gods or whatever sets of myths there are. So, for example, if you actually read, if you're a fan of, say, Greek myths, and you'll see Hermes every now and then kind of mocking some of the ideas there, or some kind of casting doubt on some of the assumptions, such as, for example, the god Apollo is supposed to be wise and good and up in the sky, but he actually manages to make Apollo act in very petty ways by being petty towards him. And same thing with Loki. Loki is among the gods, but is not actually a god, not one of the Norse gods. And so he can, in the myths at least, while he may still often do things to help others and be part of them and actually save the day in some cases, he is also often mocking and pointing out how stupid the people around him are. And that leads to the movie The Sting. If you haven't seen it, you really should. It is one of the great movies of all time. It's one of the classic con man movies. Robert Redford and Paul Newman, great team of actors. They just work well off of each other anyway. But what it does is shows you what a long con is, and neither of these people are really good people, but by their actions, they can not only show the inherent corruption within the society they're in, which is Depression era Chicago, and the gangland connections and cops and all that sort of thing, but also just how there can be considered a code of ethics among thieves, which is an inherently contradictory idea, and so on and so forth. These kinds of contradictions, these kinds of morally squishy and ethically uncertain moments are really great ways to inform and explain how our world is not a easygoing, comfortable place, and it is sometimes really complex. I also want to point out I need to apologize for the issue with the Matrix not being on easy to find. Whenever you're being given a link such as Amazon, the rental cost for Amazon is usually fairly cheap. It's $2.99 or $3.99 for most movies. But if you don't want to do that, I'm always fine with you having a different rental service, having a friend with the DVD, going to Redbox, See if your library has a copy. My library's actually got a very extensive selection of DVDs and movies, so maybe check there. Or if you've happened to see it, in the recent past, you can even just comment on your memory of that. Although I always recommend rewatching those kinds of things to get a better sense of them. So after you go through those readings, and check out the overview, think about a couple things. So the assignment, of course, is partner project, which is covering the roles of villains, and I'm specifically focusing on villains because tricksters are kind of the middle level. Sometimes tricksters are villains, sometimes they're heroes. So it helps you kind of slide into what the role of villain is. I want you to kind of think of the same kind of questions about villains as you sort of thought about for heroes. Because again, a villain exists not just to be the bad guy we hiss at, but to comment on and inform our ideas of our society. Now, sometimes villains can be more simplistic than a hero, but quite often people like villains more than they like the heroes. So is that because they have fewer constraints or they are able to show some level of corruption that we suspect is in society? Who knows? But tricksters can take that villainous role in this way, which is to point out these kind of absurdities. And of course, the research proposal project is for the long term project, which will come at the end. So the end of the course, you'll be writing a much longer analysis paper, kind of like the one you just wrote, but in a much bigger context. You'll be looking at a hero or set of heroes within a single story. So it doesn't have to be a series. It can be just one book or one movie or one TV show, but it has to be something that is amidst to, which by that I mean allows you to look deeply into a set of characters and ask some serious questions about them. So it can be something such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, some of the classic stories, or something modern. If you want to do Ocean's 11 movies, or Harry Potter, or Hunger Games, or anything that's coming out recently, you can do any of the Marvel movies. You could do anything from TV. I mean, if you have a question about whether or not I'm going to allow you to do it, feel free to shoot me an email. But in general, my main concern here isn't, that you're falling within my constraints of it, is that you have chosen a story that will let you ask serious questions. So that's the only real criteria. Now, to do that, I'm going to ask you to write what's known as a research proposal. In the research proposal format, if you've got questions, this PDF shows you a little bit about how to create research questions and make them useful. But the research proposal format is described mostly here on page 256 of the reading, so page 13 of the PDF. And it will kind of give you an overall sense of what's asked for. Now, different kinds of research proposals have different requirements. This research proposal I'm going to ask you to have right is not exactly the same thing as the proposal they put here. But what I want you to do, and this is the list as you can do as a reference, and also the research proposal assignment should give you a better sense of it, is have a title page, have a paragraph or two, or even three, that talks about what that proposal is, about what your topic is. Do a little bit of a review. So at this point, I don't need you to give me a very formal review. Kind of give me an idea of what you're looking at doing. So you haven't chosen your sources yet, but I want to look at these kinds of sources, or I want to ask these kinds of questions, or the material I'm looking at is a television show. So I'm thinking I'm going to pick 2 or 3 episodes. By the way, if you pick a television show, you don't want to do the whole television show. You want to do a few example episodes, that sort of thing. And so that one thing I'm asking you to do here. So mention 2 places you were probably going to look for sources, or even try to find a couple sources. Talk about where you'd like to go. Do you have a conclusion in mind? I would like to see if this. So that's another place to put your research question. I'd like to see if this is the case, or something like that. And also discuss some of the things you don't understand. So basically, this is going to talk about what you're hoping to do with the long-term research proposal, so that you can start looking now at your source, start watching that as well, start trying to find sources, start thinking about what this paper is going to be like. And I will very quickly, probably at the end of this week, make weeks 4 through 6 available. Right now, I'm basically making certain that all the links are now to live places and not to like Matrix was to a dead link, and just making certain that I have phrased all the assignments the way I want them. And once those all become live, you can look ahead and see what that analysis paper, the final analysis paper, is going to look like. So those are the main things to be aware of. One more thing is this week is an extremely busy week for me, so I may be a day or two delayed in getting responses back to your analytic papers and possibly even to the discussion board. I hope not, but if it is a day or two late, don't panic. I am on it. I'm just a little swamped at the moment, but you'll see it all soon. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.